Pinsky
Come on, man.
on Denver's talk station, 630 KHOW.
All right, anybody watching us on YouTube just now got to see me adjust the camera angle because it wasn't exactly where we needed it. How is it now, DJ Shannon? Is it pretty good? I don't know.
And I've indicated on there that you're celebrating National Get Over It Day.
Is that what it is today? I do feel like that. Maybe that's why I'm wearing my Daniel Defense shirt. You best get over it, because I don't care what your problem is. I'm in that kind of mood today. We got some really interesting guests coming up later in the show. Just a couple of guests, but I'll mention them to you now. At 7:05, we've got an attorney named Karen Kepler. I think I've mentioned maybe twice now in the past few weeks, because I find it rather fascinating how old rock and rollers are selling their rights to their entire music catalog in one big transaction for millions or tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars. And I find it fascinating. And one listener suggested by email, hey, maybe they're doing this because it would make it easier on their heirs, because these folks are getting older now, easier on their heirs to just inherit some big chunk of money than this weird asset with this weird income stream, not knowing how to value it, all that stuff. And I do think that is a significant part of what's going on. But we're going to talk with an attorney who's expert on this stuff and try to learn more about why these aging rock and rollers are doing what they're doing. And then I'm so excited for this. At 8:05 a.m., for those of you who watched CBS News for many, many years and watch Fox News over the past couple of years, you will know Lara Logan, who this woman is the real deal when it comes to war reporting and aggressive, difficult investigative reporting. And she's got her own show on Fox Nation right now called Lara Logan Has No Agenda. I don't think there's anybody with better sources at our border to understand what is going on at the U.S.-Mexico border and the utter chaos that has erupted there since the Biden administration has put in all of these incentives for people to show up at the border. Well, people follow incentives, and they're showing up. And we're going to talk with Lara Logan at 8:05 about what is going on at our southern border. I'm very much looking forward to that conversation. Let me take a minute and elaborate on something that you may have heard in our newscast just a little bit earlier, and maybe heard some of this yesterday as well. But the CDC, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, have put out their first set of public health recommendations for Americans who have been fully vaccinated against COVID. Fully vaccinated means both shots of a vaccine that requires 2 shots, or a single shot of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, and waiting long enough, which is at least 2 weeks after the second dose in a 2-dose series, or at least 2 weeks after the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. That is the definition for fully vaccinated. Now, first, let me say, before I tell you what some of these things are, that it is remarkable that we are able to have this conversation now. I know it feels like we've been dealing with COVID forever. It's almost exactly a year since it became clear that this was a real problem in the United States of America. In the first week or two of the story, some people thought that it was going to be confined to the first couple of places the virus was found. I told you on the show the U.S. was going to be in trouble for this thing, but I didn't anticipate the level of trouble we got into. I thought it was going to be a lot smaller than this, just bigger than some people thought. I certainly misunderestimated it myself. But if you were to, in a generic sense, before COVID, pre-COVID, have just thrown out this idea that we're going to get hit with a new, highly contagious and modestly deadly virus, and that we would have a vaccine developed against it and approved by the government in 9 or 10 months, most people, including probably me, would have said that there's no way. There's no way you can develop a vaccine that fast, and there's no way you can get it through government approval that fast. And yet here we are. What an incredible tribute to modern science and to the pharmaceutical industry that the left in particular loves to hate. And some credit for this, a little bit of credit for this, goes to the Trump administration's efforts to streamline the regulatory process. I have no idea what that would have looked like if it had happened now under the bureaucratically minded Democrats versus the anti-bureaucracy mindset of President Trump. But most of the credit goes to the private sector. And it really is absolutely remarkable that about 1 year after we get hit with COVID, we now have our first set of public health recommendations for fully vaccinated people. It's incredible. So, here's what the CDC says, and they note that these recommendations apply to non-healthcare settings. All right, so not in hospitals, essentially. Fully vaccinated people can visit with other fully vaccinated people indoors without wearing a mask and without physical distancing. By the way, if that weren't true, you would think there's probably not that much purpose to a vaccine if you still couldn't do that. Fully vaccinated people can visit with unvaccinated people from a single household who are at low risk for severe COVID-19 disease, can have that visit indoors without wearing masks and without physical distancing. Now, what does that mean? What does it mean to say that vaccinated people can meet with unvaccinated people without wearing masks or physical distancing? What it means is that they believe at this point, and this was a huge question and still probably remains something of a question, they believe that the vaccine significantly reduces asymptomatic carrying of the vaccine, of the virus. There has been a fair amount of question whether a person who got the vaccine could still have the virus, let's say, in their sinuses, not have symptoms because of the vaccine, and then, but still be able to transmit the virus to somebody else. And this recommendation suggests that the CDC believes that that is not true. Now, they're not completely ruling it out because they say you can do this with people who are at low risk for disease, but still, it's a remarkable statement, the implication of it. Fully vaccinated people can refrain from quarantine and testing following a known exposure if they don't have any symptoms. And for now, they say fully vaccinated people should continue to take precautions in public, like wearing a well-fitted mask and physical distancing. And I think part of the issue there, going back to what I said before, is if they're not absolutely sure that a vaccinated person cannot carry the virus, even asymptomatically, then they want to make sure that a person who's vaccinated doesn't get too close to a high-risk person out in public. You know, an older person or a person of any age who might have some kind of respiratory ailment that you don't know about, or some kind of immunity, autoimmune problems, something like that. So that's why they say take precautions like wearing a well-fitted mask. It's really primarily a precaution against getting other people sick. Fully vaccinated people should continue to wear masks and do the distancing and adhere to other prevention measures when visiting with unvaccinated people who are at increased risk for COVID-19 disease or have an unvaccinated household member who is at increased risk. That's a similar reasoning to what I just described. And similarly, they say maintain physical distance and wear masks when visiting with unvaccinated people from multiple households. Avoid medium and large-sized in-person gatherings. That's going to get better, too, fairly soon as more people get vaccinated. Get tested if experiencing symptoms. Follow guidance issued by your employers. And follow CDC and Health Department travel requirements and recommendations. All in all, I mean, that's about as good a list as you're going to find just a few weeks, essentially, into the vaccination process of a large country that has over 500,000 dead from a virus that's been around for a year. What remarkable progress. And we should all be tremendously grateful to these just brilliant scientists at mostly American companies. Moderna's American, Johnson & Johnson is American, although they have overseas operations, and some of this work was done overseas for J&J. And Pfizer is an American company, but their partner in the vaccine development, BioNTech, is a German company that I think actually did most of the research, and Pfizer put up the money and does the manufacturing. But just remarkable. Just remarkable. By the way, you don't see this kind of progress out of European companies. There are theoretically vaccines out there from Russia and China, but we have no idea if they're any good. Anyway, congratulations to these companies, and it is so wonderful to see our first set of recommendations for fully vaccinated people. Remarkable. I started yesterday's show with a conversation with Adam Brandon from FreedomWorks, and I didn't spend that much time during the show talking about this $1.9 trillion coronavirus so-called relief bill that is the single most wasteful and potentially harmful, debt blowing up piece of legislation that I've ever seen. And part of the reason that I didn't spend so much time talking about it yesterday is how angry I am about it. And I don't like being the angry guy on the radio. And I thought I would wait one day and let my blood pressure settle down a little bit about it. And I'm going to do my best to not be the angry guy on the radio. But I'm still furious. This bill is a complete disaster. Anybody who claims that they understand the economics of it and that this is going to provide significant economic benefits is either economically clueless or an outright liar. This bill is as unnecessary as anything you could imagine, and all it really is a series of Democratic wish list slush funds. This bill is going to require the federal government to borrow close to $6,000 for every single living American. Whether you're 80 or 18 or 8 weeks, the federal government is going to be borrowing close to $6,000 that somebody will pay back one day, one way or another. In return for which, some fraction of Americans will get $1,400 that they shouldn't be getting anyway. Federal workers will get 15 paid weeks of vacation if they have a kid who is not in school full time. By the way, that would apply if you have a kid in school 4 days a week, but not 1 day a week, right? 4 out of 5 days a week. You could take, as a federal government employee now, 15 weeks of paid vacation. When Republicans wanted to lower the income threshold for who would get $1,400 per person, including per child, Senate Democrats opposed lowering that because it would have started to cut federal government employees out of getting this free money. And you may recall that federal government employees have some of the cushiest jobs in the world when you talk about their overall compensation package. Yes, many of them are overpaid when it comes to salary, but even the ones where the salary might be reasonable for the job, and I don't know what percentage that is, the rest of the benefits, including in particular how it is nearly impossible to get fired, make it such a cushy job. And in the aggregate, I think most people believe a job whose holders are overpaid. But Democratic senators wanted to make sure that all the federal employees whose votes they can count on so that Democrats can carry Virginia get an extra $3,000 or $4,000 or $5,000, depending on, whether it's a couple or whether they've got a kid or two. It is so cynical. This bill contains a bailout, multi-tens of billions of dollars bailout for what are called multi-employer pensions. These are terribly run pensions for union industries where several different unionized companies would get together and organize a pension together. And these are some of the worst run pensions in America with massive deficits in funding that will not be able to, in most cases, or at least many cases, to pay the benefits to their former workers. It was a horrendous structure, but they were allowed to get away with it because unions own the Democratic Party. And this includes a bailout for many of those pension funds. So all the rest of us who are contributing already to our own retirement or work for a company that does it responsibly are going to have to bail out all of these busting up union pensions. And here's one more. Senator Cassidy proposed an amendment yesterday that would have said that the $1,400 checks cannot go to prisoners, federal prisoners. Senator Tom Cotton uses the Boston Marathon bomber as an example of someone who will get a $1,400 check under this plan. And I would like you to know that every single Democrat voted no on this amendment. Every Republican voted yes. It passed. And so thanks to Democrats, prisoners will be getting your child's tax dollars.
This is Denver's Talk Station with Ross Kaminsky now. Tom Martino at 10, 630 KHOW, Denver.